Good afternoon, and welcome to everybody attending today, and welcome to our online guests on Zoom as well. My name is Karen Burkhardt. I am the Executive Director of the Colorado Springs World Affairs Council. We are pleased to welcome you to today's program, Is Afghanistan a Lost Cause? Just take a moment. Let's thank our sponsors, the Richard Petritz Foundation, the Tiemans Foundation. Thank you to our institutional members, the El Pomar Foundation, University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, Pikes Peak State College, Colorado Springs Chamber and EDC, SIVA Charter High School, and the Fountain Valley School. Today we have the distinct pleasure of hosting Rangina and Hamidi, but before we do that, I just want to introduce you to one person here with us tonight. Many of you know that Elise Sappington's last day was March 8th. We miss her very much. She did an amazing job, but I would like to introduce you all to Terry Browning, if you could just stand. So you're going to be seeing a lot more of Terry. She's our new International Visitor Program Manager, and we are delighted to have her. So welcome, Terry. Since 2003, Ms. Hamidi worked tirelessly from her home in Kandahar to better the lives of Afghan citizens through development projects, advocacy, and most importantly, education. Examples of her work include the establishment of an all-women's social enterprise in Kandahar, leadership of the Mesan International School with a world-class and internationally accredited curriculum. More recently, Ms. Hamidi was Minister of Education in Afghanistan until August 15th, 2021. Ms. Hamidi is well-versed in child development, educational psychology, educational management, Islamic pedagogy, curriculum, business administration, development in conflict-efficient countries, and gender issues from an Islamic perspective. She has contributed to numerous publications and radio programs, and she is the co-author of a book entitled Embroidering with Boundaries, Afghan Women Creating a Future. Please help me to welcome Rangina Hamidi. I'm so pleased to have you here today.
Thank you, Karen. It's an honor to be here, and I'm glad the snow didn't stop me from coming.
Yes. And thank you to everybody who braved that snow. I was looking out the window and just thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know how this is going to happen. So let me just start with a few questions that Rangina and I have discussed a little bit. So historians call Afghanistan the graveyard of empires. How do you explain that as an Afghan?
It's $1 million question that I think we policymakers globally have not been able to come up with the answer as to why that is. But I think as an Afghan who unfortunately was born at a time right before the coup of the president of the time that we had, the USSR then, invaded Afghanistan, and Afghanistan has been in turmoil for 45 years. So my life has been a product of witnessing both from afar, but also from within, the complexity of the Afghan nation. And I think one of the, and this is my personal, I'm not an academic on Afghan history, so please don't quote me, but as a citizen, as a woman, as a daughter, as a mother of Afghanistan, I think one of the reasons behind why people cannot conquer this land is linked to the complex history of this nation and the people who call themselves Afghans. The pride to the point where giving yourself, giving your life, ending your life for the cause of keeping your land, your mother, is so strong that for centuries, that notion has survived. Of course, efforts globally have been made to change the Afghan people. And the change efforts, be it Russia in the past or USSR, to Britain back in the days during colonial time when it didn't succeed in colonizing Afghanistan in the way that India was colonized, close to us, to the 20 years of America's direct involvement with NATO forces, is because when foreign entities come to Afghanistan, they pick and choose their partners in a diverse country with diverse populations and a diverse society with language, religion, ethnicity at the core, neglecting that important aspect of the culture and the society, and also neglecting that this country was one of the few nations about 1,200 years back when the nation converted to Islam not by force but by will. When we don't when we don't take the time to understand who these people are, what is their history, what is their desire, and we assume that these people want this and we take our assumption to impose on it, of course in the end we get what we get. So I don't think it's a graveyard of empires. I hope that and that's not a very nice thing to say, but to know that these are people who strongly believe their beliefs, and unfortunately 45 years of active war and destruction and forces to separate the people from one another rather than an actual effort to unify them, can speak a little bit to why we won't allow others to conquer us and to lead us in the way that they want to.
So, August 15th, 2021 must have been a difficult day. Did I understand you correctly?
That was my birthday.
It was your birthday.
I was turning 45 years old and I was supposed to celebrate it.
So, based on what you just said, what do the Afghan people want?
I don't think I can answer that question based on what I just said. The Afghan population is a diverse population, and the 45 years of destruction in my country has divided the diversity of people further, with different political factions, different political forces in the region and globally influencing and impacting the people, that it is not easy for me to say today what is it that the Afghan people as one unit population want, because different ethnicities want different things, different regions want different things, and the complexity is further exacerbated by the fact that when a population undergoes 45 years of nonstop violence, you lose your sight about what it is that you want, because ultimately we force a population to be forced to make a decision of, are you going to worry about food on the table or on the sofa for your kids and their livelihood to remain alive? Or are you going to have the luxury of sitting and philosophizing of what it is that we want as a nation and as a people? I think it's kind of hard to expect Afghans who have suffered so much and continue to have a vision of what it is they want. The one thing for sure that I can say today is that every Afghan woman, child, man is tired of being killed or killing.
Thank you. So going back to that 20-year reign or governance of the Republic, what are some of the major accomplishments that you think happened, and what were the failures?
There are great accomplishments that we cannot cover and shut our eyes on. Primarily, I think to focus on education, which was a field that is still near and dear to me. The number of children that started to attend schools or enroll, number of families enrolling their children in schools across the country was the highest in the past 20 years than in the history of Afghanistan. people who traditionally would never consider sending their children to school, both boys and girls, began to feel very comfortable, particularly in major city centers, where the focus on education was. More girls, more young men graduated with degrees in new fields, which then took them to countries in the region, India in particular, that created a special program for attracting young graduates to come and seek bachelor's and master's degrees to further their education. Fulbright in America brought many Afghans, Chevening scholars in Britain, among other countries. So the opportunity for young Afghans, men and women, to seek and to enhance their education experience was great. Development did happen with money literally pouring like rain. In 2003 when I first went, donors were literally asking anybody and everybody to just do something, here's the money. And for those of you who've worked in the development world, that's like the most ideal place to be in, right? When donors are asking you for to use their funds rather than you writing proposals asking for funds. So development did take place. Hospitals were built, roads were built, reconstruction and so many other levels happened. Governance, from having either no buildings or very rundown and worn-torn buildings with gunshots and bomb remnants still from the wars, completely rejuvenated with furniture and decor. So the country did progress a lot. We got connected. We did a what is that word? Leapfrog or frog leap or leapfrog. So because of the war, we never had like landlines for telephone across the country. But in 2003, when this industrial revolution around technology and the boost and telephone access via satellite, we didn't have to go through the landline process anymore. We went to 5G or 3G, very quickly. Our neighboring Pakistan, which is a far more developed nation compared to Afghanistan, and it hasn't faced 45 years of war, they did not have the type of internet connectivity as we did in Afghanistan in the past 20 years. The world was engaged, the world was involved. We learned the language of English very quickly, so we became quite accessible to a lot of the international community. But at the same time, some of the challenges, and I don't know if I can blame, yes, I do blame ourselves and the Afghans. You can't always point fingers at others, but the fact that the international community aligned its resources and power sharing with warlords, drug lords, killers. Now in retrospect, what did we expect? When most of the leaders' reason for being in a leadership position was not to serve the population or the country, but rather to serve his pockets or his family business. Was this something that any critical mind would expect that this could be sustainable? Obviously not. And then corruption, of course, became a huge entity, which we still, of course, globally talk about. Yes, corruption was there, but I also want to remind us that corruption in Afghanistan was not merely an activity of Afghans alone. There have been very many big international corrupt actors in this game as well. So I hope that answers some.
Thank you. So you mentioned a little bit the opportunities in urban areas were greater. I wonder if I can kind of ask you a question with a lot of different parts to it. Can you describe generally what is life like for the people in Afghanistan today, and how does it differ, urban versus rural? And describe that a little bit. What is happening right now?
Afghanistan is divided. So while development did take place in a lot of major city centers, Kabul, Mazar, Herat, Kandahar, Jalalabad, and other major cities, the rural Afghanistan, the village life, the districts, which is a majority of the country. And I challenge anyone in this room, if you went to Afghanistan today and you just took maybe a 2-hour drive out of Kabul to one of the districts around surrounding Kabul, you probably would not see much of a difference in the terrain and the physical appearance of that space or that place, much different than say 200-300 years back. Mud homes, mud walls, farms, unpaved roads, electricity, not like formal electricity with like lines, like no infrastructure electricity, but the fact that solar panels have now made it to the Afghan market and people are learning that you can actually get electricity through solar panels. Some farmers, people living in villages are investing in getting solar panels to get lights for the night, but then most importantly, really to use solar panels to generate electricity to pump water out, because many of the rivers with climate change are drying up. And so in order to get agriculture to continue, you need water. But lifestyle is very much not changed as compared to the past. City life, it's a different story, of course. Mm-hmm. But then if you look at Kabul today and compare to Kabul in the 60s and 70s, and of course I wasn't in Afghanistan to know, but from looking at the pictures, we do have someone who has remembered. Yes, there's a lot of development in Kabul today, particularly in the past 20 years, but the aesthetic beauty that Kabul architecturally had, it's gone. We have a lot of development, there's a lot of buildings, there's a lot of glass, there's a lot of bling bling lights, there's a lot of flash, like you can see billboards and stuff, and so we consider that as a sign of development, but it was done so quickly and so hastily that the aesthetics of what it meant to be Afghan from the past is not there. And so similarly to the physical difference between these two contexts within the same country, there's also a difference in the mentality and the behavior of citizens. The rural communities continue to be extremely conservative, extremely traditional, believing the beliefs that have been set in that culture, in that society for centuries. In contrast with major cities, particularly again Kabul, where people were exposed, particularly in the past 20 years, to new ideas, this notion of democracy, this notion of human rights, women's rights, children's rights. And so there is almost like a cultural clash within the country where, yes, there was a lot of development work, and I'm blessed to have my friend here who was engaged in development work in Afghanistan, but the majority of the resource and attention in the 20 years was on cities rather than rural areas. And I will conclude this question with, when I served as Minister of Education for 14 months, the one stark data and information that I got firsthand was that in the 20 years of effort of rebuilding Afghanistan, and a lot had been spent on education efforts. In fact, more than $1 billion had been spent on teacher training alone in Afghanistan. More than $1 billion has been spent on teacher training in Afghanistan in the 20 years. But yet in 2020, there were communities inside Afghanistan, particularly in the south and in the east, where you could not even find a boys' school, let alone a girls' school, within 100-kilometer radius. Radius or diameter. I mean, so it was hard to find a school. And so, yes, the cities flourished and tried, but at the same time, Kabul, Surubi, which is a district of Kabul province, we didn't have a single girls' school in Surubi province. And this is Kabul. So there were differences. Development happened, but development was selective, development was political, development had whoever was leading development had their own agendas embedded in it, which is not unlikely anywhere in the world because it's very hard to find people to be very neutral in their decisions of developing societies and communities.
So as the former Minister of Education, what is the status of education today?
State of education, I think this is the one main topic that we all know and we've been discussing and hearing is that girls beyond 6th grade are not allowed to go and continue and finish their schooling. Doors to schools have been shut down. Universities followed. Any university, any field, any subject that any girl was studying is no longer able to. Interestingly enough, from my visits that I've recently taken, including being in Kandahar in January of this year, women teachers are all required to come to school every day to teach because the 1st grade to 6th grade is still open, but the current regime has made it mandatory for teachers who were teaching beyond 6th grade to come and teach anyway because they're still getting the salary. But no matter, it seems like from the biggest world leaders to the most common men and women on earth who have tried to communicate and understand the reason behind this closure, so far I have not come to an understanding of what the reason really is. And if anybody in this room knows, please enlighten me, because at my conclusion on this is that men in power, yet once again, in a different form, have taken the autonomy of girls and women in their hand to make their political move. And we're very much aware of how men in power have taken our rights in this country as well, but in a different light. So it's just an unfortunate phenomenon that continues globally.
So that leads me to the next question and the thought. So during the time that you were working in Afghanistan, you know, it's a conservative society, but you were able to affect change, and you were able to do it within a very conservative society. How did you navigate cultural barriers, and how did you engage men and community leaders to make the changes that you made?
That continues to be the challenge, but I think I will share one story, I think that encapsulates what I had to go through for 20 years and what strategy I personally as a woman used to continue to do the kind of work that I'm doing. It's the year's 2005, so we're in the beginning of this quest to develop Afghanistan. Uruzgan is a province right next to northeast of Kandahar, and if somebody was to do a survey today and look at the progress and development of Afghanistan and its 34 provinces for over 20 years, Uruzgan province is probably the least in every single category of work, including education. In the education ministry, the statistic department looked at all sorts of benchmarks for education. And of course, the last province not meeting the list of benchmarks was the province of Uruzgan. So this is the province that I went to. As a young woman, 2005, I was single, I was not married, and there was an attempt by a donor-funded activity of an NGO to select a shura, or a council of leaders for the province, because it was a devastated province, and so the government was really trying to figure out how to collect leaders from within the community to work with to address the needs of the society. And because the funding came from NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, this process of creating or selecting this council had to be in a democratic process. So we had to go and bring all these men and encourage them to run for this council and give their speech. So it was an exercise. And I'm the only female worker of the organization in Kandahar to do this. And I became a stubborn woman and I said, I'm going to Uruzgan, even though my male colleagues said it's not appropriate. But because I'd come from America and I was this woman, I make my rules, I went. I went and I spent 3 days witnessing this process, and it was thousands of men, young, old, middle-aged. And of course, every single eye there was on me because they also were surprised, like, who is she and what is she doing here, right? But of course, I'm wearing all the black abaya, I have a black scarf, I'm not wearing makeup, I'm not wearing anything flashy to attract any attention, but the mere fact that I'm a woman, I'm there. Third day, we're supposed to fly back using the military airplane to bring us back to Kandahar because the road was unsafe. And me and my colleagues who had also come from America were waiting for the plane delayed. So we had to sit and wait in the governor's office in the courtyard. So I'm sitting and I all of a sudden noticed this older gentleman, white beard, turban, sitting far from me but staring at me. And I'm so uncomfortable that I'm like looking, is my leg showing, is my neck showing, like what's going on? And he won't say anything to me. And I, out of my own cultural understanding, I'm not supposed to initiate the conversation with an older gentleman. So finally, he doesn't ask me, but he asks my colleague. He says, who is she? Finally breaks the ice. My colleague, my boss at the time, explained who I was, where I'd come from, the fact that I've come from America. And then the old man just turns to me, makes an eye contact, and he says, you must be educated. I said, a little. And my colleague knew my background, and then he goes and starts, bad-mouthing me, saying she was supposed to study medicine, but she dropped out and studied Islamic history and women's studies instead. What is she going to do with this? And the old man is not interested in his spiel about complaining of me not getting my medical degree. He says to me, and you must think we men don't like educated women. I said, no, sir, why would I say that? And he said, I've been witnessing and watching you for the past 3 days. If I know that my educated women can act and react the way you did, I'm not against education. I mean, this is a burden I've been carrying on my shoulders since that talk, and I so vividly remember and hear his voice. And this is his voice. He says, unfortunately, in my country, and he was probably in his 60s maybe, this is 2005, he says, unfortunately, whenever we've seen an educated woman, we've always seen someone who is not an Afghan or who refuses to be an Afghan. So again, I am not here to say that all educated women in Afghanistan, but this was his take in a province that is the least served, the most conservative, a man who sees education, who really saw education as a threat to his cultural values, to his religious understanding and belief, and then putting the pressure on someone. And that was not my intention. At that time, I was doing nothing with education. I was just doing a project. To share the story, to tell you that the people of Afghanistan are not necessarily against education for girls or development or progress. What we've done, unfortunately, as a people and as governments, particularly starting with the communist coup, is we've politicized education when every regime has come to power. And the opposition, of course, will always use education as a threat because that entity in power uses education as a platform for their belief in their agenda. And so when you study that and you realize that this is an incredibly underserved people, and so Uruzgan to this day, I think Uruzgan is the only place that still doesn't have even girls going to school to 6th grade because there's no more girls left to go to school. And the little that were going, there was only one school built after 2010 in the city center of Tirinkot, and that has now, what I'm hearing is that that has shut down. When you don't serve that kind of a conservative traditional community and you don't meet them where they are, how do you expect those people to develop? How do you expect those people to then welcome? And so I really lost my train of thought of where your question started, but I thought it was important to share that story that the Afghan population, even the most conservative and the most underserved, are not against progress and development and education. It's primarily now, as an ex-politician, primarily our responsibility as leaders that we with very much difficulty, we've ruled and governed that country without addressing the needs of all of our citizens, even if they were the most conservative. It's always much more appealing to do something to the top elite tier and ignore, but from government, from democracy, we know the real power of change lies with the masses. And if you ignore the masses, transitions happen very easily.
That's a wonderful story, and it's profound, I think. So to everybody, the title of tonight's program is Afghanistan a Lost Cause? And that title came from Rangina herself. So let me just ask you, is Afghanistan a lost cause?
I refuse to believe, and I hope that I can get your support in at least mentally not treating and not seeing Afghanistan as a lost cause. I've witnessed, and I continue to witness, the resilience and the bravery of our Afghan men and women, both in country and outside of the country. We're a nation that has a lot of trauma. And for those who are in the mental health world, you understand the impact of trauma on people. And so I think why I don't want to believe that this is a lost cause, several layers. Historically, this has been a very important geographic region that has impacted geopolitics globally for centuries, one. So we can't just lost cause, what would that mean? Because if we could completely forget it and completely ignore it, our recent history here has also showed what happens in a country that we completely neglect and forget. Number two, the sacrifice that millions of Afghans have paid with their life and blood, my father including. I was talking to Deborah earlier. My father came, he was inspired by me. Sometimes I blame myself. He was inspired by me to return back to his country and serve in the government before I joined the government. And unfortunately, he created enough enemies which went and took his life, targeting him in July of 2011. And when the country shifted over back to the element that we went to fight in 2001, I do question what my dad sacrificed himself for. He was trying to bring the democracy that we had inherited or learned about here, and that's what we wanted to do. So the sacrifice of millions of people like my father cannot go in vain by thinking that Afghanistan's a lost case. And finally, I think this is where and I don't know what is within me that has enabled me to be empathetic to the point where I also question myself, because now we're teaching empathy globally, right? We're forcing empathy on children, on schools. We want children to become empathetic because it's a good virtue, it's a good value, it's a good thing. But as I've aged, I've begun to question people, particularly young men, joining movements like the Taliban, like the Al-Shabaabs, like the Hamas. What is it in their upbringing and in their experience as human? Because they're not animals. They're human beings, born into contexts, forced into situations that force them to do that. And so unless and until we understand what drives a young man The guy who killed my father was a 17-year-old young man from Uruzgan province. That's what his ID said, because his head was no longer there when he blew his head up to kill my father, and he succeeded. But to this day, I don't blame him, because how can a 17-year-old boy make such a decision to go kill someone? Because if he's willing to kill himself, then why would the life of anybody else matter? And we as a humanity, we as human beings, as mothers, as fathers, as leaders, we need to really address, why do we force certain people to certain situations and contexts where they do that? And so if we give up on Afghanistan, we are allowing many more communities across the globe to enable young men's communities to be violent in that way, to themselves and to others. And we as a humanity cannot afford to continue that.
So what is next? What can the international community and the people in this room, what can we do to help the situation you're describing?
I think the best thing to do is to keep Afghanistan as a topic of conversation still. In this country, we've learned that we tend to forget, our forgetting rate. We go on and we forget things very quickly, and we pass on, move on to the next big thing. Realistically speaking, I know that the way the world is dealing with a lot other complex situations than Afghanistan, it is very unlikely that Afghanistan is going to get any global attention anytime soon, unfortunately. But you can keep Afghanistan alive in your conversations, in your discussions, and keep learning about this complex country. You know, one issue that I've personally been battling is that people easily jump to conclusions about Afghanistan, or the Afghan people are like this, or the Afghan people are there. And I'm going to use my own example. So I'm from Kandahar. I'm born to a Pashtun family. Mom and dad are both Pashtuns. I didn't choose to be born to this ethnic group. And yet today, when I speak about my country and my people, my mere identity of being a Pashtun from Kandahar, because I was born there, automatically stamps me with, oh, she has to be a Talib supporter because she's from that region. And we, the international community, have started to feed into that narrative. Our conversations can start questioning, why are we supporting and feeding divisions among people and not engaging intellectually and historically to learn about the complexities of communities and societies like Afghanistan? And I wish we were the only one on earth. Unfortunately, we're not. And so keeping Afghanistan alive in your conversations, putting pressure on, I mean, elections are right around the corner. And I know Afghanistan is probably not a topic of conversation of this election, but it might be, we never know, right? From what I know, the current administration, after the pullout, has very bluntly said, we don't want to talk about Afghanistan, we don't want to deal with Afghanistan. That's the other thing we can do as citizens, is that no, we are going to talk about Afghanistan and we are going to have to deal with Afghanistan, because you can't leave 40 million people hostage for something that they didn't ask for. And lastly, and this is probably the easiest, is there tangible, pragmatic, practical projects currently going, still ongoing, to help women, men, and children, creating jobs, bringing opportunities. One thing that I want to share with you from the women that I work in Kandahar, we gave them food packages after a big donation in 2021, it was December. And the women thanked us, but they all said, this is appreciated, but we don't want to depend on the world always. Give us jobs so that we can continue to provide for our own families. And that's what my project called Kandahar Treasure is doing. But there's SafePath, there's Zarif Designs, there's so many other programs, pragmatic programs that are still ongoing in Afghanistan, creating jobs and opportunities for women to work. So find out who's still there, who's working, and support in whatever capacity that you can, not just monetarily, but in kind as well. So practical ways to help.
So yes, you mentioned Kandahar Treasure. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what you do?
So there is a website, kandahartreasure.com. Feel free to visit it when you have the opportunity. We are actually on our 21-year history of a social enterprise that actually officially became a social enterprise in 2008 in Kandahar, where we take a very traditional embroidery technique that only women use because men in Kandahar don't embroider. And so women embroider beautiful artifacts, scarves, shirts, other products, and we've been selling those products in country when we could, and we still can. Buyers still come to us, and they're just not as many as they used to be. And we also export, including to America, and we're working actually on creating our first ever online shop to be able to make our products available. But for any of you who are interested, my sister in Virginia is holding all of our stock in her basement and helping us sell it. But we will also be participating at the Santa Fe Folk Art Market in July. So if those of you who will be traveling, please make sure you stop by the booth. And really, through that program, what we've done is, just to share numbers too, at the moment we're employing 160 artisans from their home base, so they're working from their homes. We provide the raw materials, they complete it, they get paid, they get the next piece. But 18 women and men are working full-time on a daily basis, coming to a facility, a location in Kandahar city. And contrary to popular opinion, where we think that women still can't work and can't leave their home, this enterprise is still ongoing. And I thought in September in late August when I came in 2021, I thought that it was the end of Kandahar Treasure. The office was closed, but we had to close it because Kandahar did see a lot of violence before the fall. In September, towards the end of September, the women sent me a message via WhatsApp and said, we want to go back to work. My response back was, how? Taliban are in control. And they said, we will deal with the Taliban, just give us permission to go to work. And I thought, who am I to stop them if they're willing to go? And so since October of 2021, the women have been coming. The Taliban did come once since that time to check and to go and see. And it was interesting when I asked the women, how was that experience? They said they were young boys, and most of the women working in the office are older women. They were just young boys. They came and they saw, and we told them, did you find anything? And the young boys apologized and walked away, and they have not come since then. So again, a small window of hope in a very hopeless situation. But it's my way, it's the women's way, it's our way of continuing to survive and work in conditions that are unthinkable. But it also shows to me the resilience of Afghan women, that in spite of the situation that they're in, my faith in them is that they will make it. And I will conclude by saying, and I hope my brothers, if there are any Afghan brothers here or American brothers, don't get offended by this, but while Afghan men have been engaged in destroying the country in one name or another for 45 years, it's the Afghan women that have held the fabric of the social fabric of the society, continuing to bring peace and love to the extent they can in their home, and the arts, this expression of their creativity and their artistic endeavor through this beautiful embroidery, whether it's in Kandahar or Mazar or Herat or Paktia or Paktika. Women have been the creators and the innovators of keeping culture and society alive. So at least let's give them that credit that they've been able to do it.
And now I have to go check the website as soon as we're finished. So I have just one more question, then we'll turn it over to everybody for questions. But so you've been a change maker. What advice would you give to young people who aspire to become leaders and advocates for people in challenging environments?
It's a really tough question. And I don't know if I'm a change maker, I just do what I believe. If that leads to change, good. I think the one thing that I'm seeing, because I have young nieces and nephews, and I'm speaking from my own experience in my own home. Young people globally have become very impatient. We want change just like we want change on our TikTok, the 10 seconds or 5-second videos we see, and we get excited or we get sad and we hear a message and we expect the world to respond in that manner because we no longer have the patience to sit and wait and invest in the change that we want to see. Change takes a long time. And if you really believe in it, you have to put your heart, soul, body, emotions all into it. And you're not always going to be, praised and celebrated. My friends in this room know I'm no longer the Minister of Education, and God, I don't ever want to go into that position again, but I'm still attacked today by people globally for things that they've misunderstood or misread or whatever they think of me. So, as a change maker, to be a change maker and then to have to endure all of that. Because when you choose to lead, whatever cause you want to lead, you better be prepared that people are going to attack you. People are going to challenge you. People are going to question you. People are going to slap you, not physically, but like morally and emotionally constantly. And what also happens when you take a leading position for leading a cause that you believe in, people also tend to forget that you're a human. People look at you as a supernatural being that is not supposed to make either mistakes and or this idea that you have to please everybody. Change makers are only able to be change makers when they stick to what they believe in rather than pleasing. And one of the problem and challenge that I'm seeing again with young people is that there's this tendency to be liked by everybody. And that's why, the likes numbers, that's what we're competing with. How many likes do you have? And so I hope that these can be a few words of advice to young people, but if you believe in it and you're willing to work for it, then do it as if your eyes are closed and your ears are shut and you have to keep your mouth open to keep spreading the message, but the Vini Vidi Vici, concept of you can't let the world stop you from doing what you believe. And it's going to be a painful journey because hard work, good work, or good result is a result of hard work and steady work, and nothing comes free in your hand from someone or somebody or something on top. So you're serious about it, stick to it. It's going to be hard days and nights, but in the end, you will persevere.
Inspiring. So I spoke to Rangina earlier and told her that this was a crowd that had tough questions, and she said she welcomes it, so bring it on.
And if you want to raise your hand, and I will approach. Malcolm, breaks the ice.
Thank you. I'm afraid I may have one of those tough questions. I directed the USAID education program to Afghanistan between the years 2010 and 2016. I spent all of 2011 in Kabul and visited Kandahar, Herat, Jalalabad, and various other places, working on the education program. So many emotions and thoughts are going through my mind right now hearing your presentation, and I thank you for that. Thank you for your service to your country. The essence of my question, which I'm having a hard time articulating, is what should we have done differently as an international community, the United States and our development partners in Afghanistan? I can assure you that we worked very hard to bring education to communities throughout Afghanistan, not just to the population centers. Our community-based education program, operated through UNICEF, as you know, worked throughout the country, bringing training local community leaders to provide education. I can reinforce your comment that when you educate a young girl, she goes home and trains her mother to read and educate her children and make sure that even the boys go to school because they know the value of education. I don't want to ramble on, so I apologize for that. But I still remember meeting with a group of 12 young women going to the American University of Afghanistan in Kabul. You know AUAF well, I'm sure. These 12 women, every single one, already had jobs in businesses, technical fields, in positions of importance. I know through my sources that every single one is no longer in Afghanistan. They told me how they had dreams for what they could do in Afghanistan. They are all gone now. The country has lost that. So my question to you, forgive me, my question to you is, what could the United States and other development partners have done differently to improve education in Afghanistan? Thank you very much. Tashakur.
Thank you.
Tashakur.
Thank you for your service and your time serving my people and my country. There's a lot of things the US could have done differently, but if we focus specifically on education, and this is from my knowledge of firsthand 14 months, last 14 months, and I don't know it all. I'm not gonna claim that I know it. It's many, many years to understand that complex ministry. For the audience, just so you know, Ministry of Education had about 270,000 personnel, of which about 220,000 were teachers and about 50,000 administrators. And out of those 50,000, about 6,000 staff members were in the headquarters of the ministry. So you can imagine the challenge of trying to manage or comprehend the size of this ministry. I would have, if I had been in charge or working with the ministry at the time, in the beginning, is that I would have focused more on the quality curriculum development of making sure providing education to children where they could use the education that they got, the 12 years through the ministry, to bring them, bring them to not compete necessarily at the global level, but at least regionally be able to compete at the regional level with other countries around us. I think one of the challenge and the criticism I have is that the focus of America and its allies in 2001 was so much on the quantity. Let's get more numbers. Let's get more students in schools. Let's build more schools. Without really taking the time to, okay, we're getting the influx of students and teachers and buildings and CBE. Yes, I recognize, in fact, CBE is the only form of education that is now available to girls outside of city centers where there's no schools for girls. But this hasty pressure on numbers, because numbers make our graphs look good, numbers make presentations look much more engaging and interesting, and in the end, what has happened in the process is that quality of education suffered. As compared to the time that students in Afghanistan went to school communist coup, the timing that we analyzed during my time, students were spending 40% less time in classroom as compared to, late 1970s, and they had 8 additional subjects to study. How many of you guys are educators here? Who allowed that? Why was that allowed? Is a question that I want to ask both policymakers, donors, as well as the ministry officials. I'm not putting the blame on internationals. This is not the job of internationals. This is the job, I've been criticized because I'm a woman, right? And of course, in a patriarchal society, men leaders are always better than women leaders, right? So of course I was always challenged that, oh, she's just merely a woman, she can't lead this organization. But I asked the question, what were these men leaders doing for 20 years? Why were we graduating a student at 12th grade? And this is not everybody, of course, but I'm talking about the challenges. A student couldn't read and write a simple paragraph, yet we're giving them a diploma. Why? Our books, and this is an interesting story. I went to Herat, the province of Herat, it's bordering Iran, as Minister of Education, and I just went to see some of the schools, and we happened to go to a boys' school in the city. And the classroom that we entered happened to be 12th grade English language subject session. So of course, being that I've been educated in America, English is obviously so I started communicating with the class, with the students in English, asking them simple questions. What's your favorite subject? They're all staring at me. Now, chances are that they were either too shy to answer, or my assessment was they couldn't comprehend what I was saying. Yet we wasted resources on teaching a subject with misspellings in the books that were printed by USAID funds, by the way, grammarly incorrect. And my reform agenda included a subject that we teach and invest in from 4th grade to 12th grade, which is the subject of English. It's one subject out of many. And we produce students who can't even answer simple questions. Why aren't we thinking outside of the box? Why aren't we analyzing the system of education? And the suggestion that I made, or the reform agenda that I created, was let's look at education as an ecosystem, because for those of you who are Afghans, the English literacy training centers across Kabul, in a span of 2 or 3 years, many students became full literate in English. Yet the Ministry of Education kept banging our head on wasting 8 years of a student's life or time on teaching them English, and they couldn't learn. So again, that was not something that the US or that you were responsible for. But at the same time, I'm also aware of many international experts working at the Ministry of Education particularly in the beginning, to help rewrite the curriculum, help create the structure and the systems. And my question is, why didn't we ask those hard questions? And what was the push to increase the numbers so much that we both jeopardize and sacrifice the quality of education in the end? But the good news is that in spite of not being the best of the systems, it still produced young men and women who did go on to those universities like AUAF or others, Kabul universities or other, and they've excelled. And we take pride as Afghans in this, that the Afghan mind has the potential. All the people of Afghanistan have been gifted with this great potential of the mind. It's unfortunate that some of our leaders have just not tapped into that potential. And unfortunately, in the 20 years, some of the internationals also didn't understand this potential. But hopefully, if there's an opportunity in the future, we can fix it. That's just the education answer. But on a political level, many more answers for how we could have done things better. And hopefully we can learn from the case of Afghanistan and not repeat this mistake in another country in the future.
Next question. Here.
Hi, I'm also grateful for being here tonight too. And recently I've been studying about organizations outside of Afghanistan who are working with Afghan refugee girls and educating them. And I'm also reading a book that just came out in February. You may have heard of Last to Eat, Last to Learn. I haven't finished the book. It just, like I said, just came out. And it's about an Afghan woman who was a refugee. And where I'm in the book was prior to 2021. She is back in Afghanistan teaching young women. I don't know how it turns out at the end. I haven't gotten there. But
She's in America right now.
Oh, she is?
I don't know if she's in Harvard, but one of the East Coast schools, but yeah, she's here.
Oh, that's wonderful, because as you know, she got a full scholarship to Oxford and she turned it down to go back to Afghanistan to teach young women. And so she talks about this. Obviously, she did it. And in some of the organizations that I'm reading about outside of Afghanistan, again, as I said, who are educating young women and girls, their intent also is for those girls to go back to Afghanistan to teach young women and girls. My question is, with the current situation as it is in Afghanistan, when and how is that ever going to happen?
I wish I had an answer for you. Honestly, I go back. I've been back 3 times, short trips. My heart wants to go back to live there, but I have a 14-year-old daughter, and she's my only child. And she's the reason I'm not going back. So if I can't convince myself to go back and take my daughter to that situation, how can I ever encourage anybody to go back, particularly as a young woman? But I'm so grateful to so many people across the globe who are either voluntarily or professionally trying anything and everything in their power to educate young women in Afghanistan, with luckily now the technological opportunities that we do have that didn't exist before. With still the limitations that obviously many communities in Afghanistan have, because majority of the population still has no access to internet or electricity, particularly girls. But again, it's the resiliency and the power of Afghan women that, in spite of the current condition, we still go in whatever capacity we can to do whatever is in our power. And also now understanding that this regime also will not last forever. 45 years, 7, 8 different regimes. Let's hope that things can change for good.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for your presentation. And I'd like to address both what you have said and the gentleman who spent time in the education as an educator, mostly in higher ed, but having 5 of my own children and how they learn. I really appreciated the idea of coming alongside with people and then guiding them to where they need to go. And I think teaching is so much like that, but in the United States, we see, even in our own population, that we look at numbers. We're not looking at people, and we're not looking at learners. And learning is as natural as it is eating or breathing for the human being. And if we understand that, then within cultural contexts that we can adjust curriculum as an instructional designer and curriculum development person, you can adjust it to allow people to be able to succeed. And I think that we miss that. And one of the also pieces that we miss is that it's all time related, and learning is not based on time. And so within our culture and within our context, everything has to be chick, 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 chick. And that's not realistic. And so we need to be more innovative. And it doesn't matter if it's in Afghanistan within their own cultural context or in the United States. We really need to think about that as people who work in curriculum so that children and people can succeed in learning, because that's a natural process.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I've actually become a student of Sadhguru. I don't know how many of you know him in this room, but he's done a beautiful, beautiful session with Sir, he's English, Graham, you would know him. He's an education specialist now, his name is just now, it just slipped my mind, but it's a conversation between these two very, profound individuals about education, and they go to the history of how this modern education, the schooling that we know of and that we put on this pedestal as the only form of, learning, they clearly tell us that this was modeled after the Industrial Revolution, creating the factories, and yes, we've been pushing through this pipeline of education for kids to learn and graduate with same standards and, competition and exams and whatnot. But if you really look at human nature, since Adam and Eve's time, human beings have been learning, right? Learning is not necessarily schooling. And that's the challenge I had, and I continue to have, particularly as minister, because we didn't have that level of high-level debate about, is the vision of the Ministry of Education to enable students to learn, or are we merely pushing this agenda of schooling? And now, having returned, well, not in America right now, but my daughter did go to public school for a year, and then I pulled her out because she lost a whole entire year of learning. Learning didn't happen. She went to school every day, but learning did not happen. And so I think it is imperative that we all question what we're doing with this notion of education. Nobody's against education, and let me be provocative and say, even the Taliban are not against education. Let me repeat that. Even the Taliban are not against education. It's the type of education that they see as a threat that they're against. And so I think we need to embrace, again, each culture, each society, each people, to have the ability to analyze and assess, what are we educating our children for? And in this existential question that we as global citizens are now questioning ourselves, what are we doing? Today I learned AI. I learned how ChatGPT works, and I'm honestly, I'm amazed. Like, this is a reality, but this is the reality now. So sending our children to go to school to memorize formulas and memorize information that is available at the tip of our fingers, what are we doing? And let me tell you, and sir, to your point also about curriculum, I was surprised, well, I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was surprised to learn that one of our books had a lesson on the traffic light, red, yellow, and green in Afghanistan, okay? Afghanistan, Kabul city, and then Kandahar, and I don't remember but like the major city centers towards the very end, so like maybe 2019, 20, is when we started to install traffic lights in the cities. And even though in Kabul we installed them, nobody obeyed them. So to have a lesson in a book, taking a whole day or whole lesson time of a child, a teacher learning and then teaching and the student required, can you imagine a kid in a faraway village in Daikundi, for example, where there's no roads, there's probably no cars even. They maybe get a car maybe, I don't know, once in the blue moon. How is learning about the three-colored red, the traffic light going to be beneficial to that kid? We don't ask critical questions. We are in the 21st century. The technological revolution is beyond our comprehension. But to still sit and think and plan and strategize the way we've done it 100 years ago, I had a challenge with some of my staff in the teacher training centers in Afghanistan, because this was an entity, a historic entity, where we provided an associate degree to teachers, a 2-year after high school. And the president had given a decree before my coming that this needed to dissolve or change into a different model, because there were kids now graduating with a 4-year degree from both public universities and private universities, and there were 17,000 graduating every year. But yet my ministry folks who were in charge of this teacher training facility across the country, they fought me to the last breath saying, no, this is a historic thing, you can't shut it down. And I'm like, but isn't education all about using new knowledge to change and advance ourselves? Because why would you hire a teacher with 2-year training when there's a 4-year degree as a teacher? So thank you for that. And I think we globally have this mission on all of our shoulders to look at education and learning through critical eye, because if we continue doing things as business has been going in the sector of education, I'm afraid that many countries, including America, will lag behind.
Do we have time for 2 more questions? One's here.
So, is Afghanistan a lost cause? What, in your opinion, is the cause that is either lost or won?
I think it was President Biden who used that we are the empire of graveyard. I mean, so to make that public statement kind of implies that this is a lost cause, let's just leave, and they did leave. And I don't know if I'm going to address your question properly or appropriately. I think the issue with Afghanistan, historically, but most importantly in the 45 years since the communist coup, we've not had an opportunity as a nation and as a people to sit, to think, and to talk to each other, meaning each other as a population, without the interference and influence of both our neighbors, and some of them not being so nice neighbors, to expanding that to the global community. Interference to the level of our everyday life, our everyday affairs, all the way to the political, entity of the leadership politically. And so how can you expect, so the question is it a lost cause? Lost cause for many, yes, because people are tired. This country for 45 years haven't been able to figure out what they want, how they want it, and what are they going to do about getting it. But not lost, saying how can you possibly judge a people that everybody's trying to meddle their affairs and their ideas into? We don't have the time to breathe. We don't have the time to sit and communicate our differences and our problems and our issues. We're a very complicated country. We've had issues with minority groups. We've had issues with religious groups. We've not been fair to our women and girls historically. Politically, an entity has ruled the country for hundreds of years, and that's a criticism, rightfully so. Developmentally, financially, we're an unfortunate country. We're the richest country in terms of minerals now. With the 20 years of experience globally, or global community in Afghanistan, have learned that we are one of the richest, mineral-rich country in the world, but we're the poorest. And how we're sitting on top of this rich treasure and not have the capacity to use it for ourselves. So for that reason, I can't accept as an Afghan, as an Afghan citizen, I can't accept that we're a lost cause, because we have the ability to be something different than what it is right now. And I think I guess if I may even ask this, what I'm asking of the international community is to allow Afghans, but I don't even know what I'm asking because we don't do that. We don't give the sovereignty to nations to be able to figure out their own future because we love to meddle. So again, I'm sorry, I'm not answering your question, but this is where the complication is. And as an Afghan, it pains me that I can't sit with my own sisters and brothers, even if they think completely different than me, to even have the ability to sit and talk. Because I always have to keep in mind who's going to be happy and who's going to be sad. And let me end it with this. I was recently asked by a State Department, it's not a colleague, but a person who works at the State Department, put me on the spot, and he said, if the Taliban ask you to come and work for them or with them, will you? Yes. And you know what my response to him was? I said, can you assure me that another 2001 scenario will not reoccur, and I, as a feminist, as a mother, as a teacher, as someone who considers herself a privileged global citizen, by choosing to work with them because of my people, that I won't be taken to Guantanamo Bay sometimes in the future? I said, if you can assure me that I won't be, then I might consider. So it's that complex position that we're put in as Afghans. You know, excuse me for the language if I'm speaking out of context, but like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. I want to serve my country, I want to serve my people, and I know I can be influential, but I have to be careful of what I decide because I don't know what tomorrow may bring. And I don't know who's behind this regime. I knew who was behind the last regime, that's why I joined. But this one is unknown. And so it makes it very, very difficult to make that decision. And I think that is something I hope that you can understand, the complexity of what we as individual Afghans, someone who can serve our country and our people, where we're stuck in this challenge of not being able to figure it out because we're not on our own.
One more question here.
Hi, my name's Jim Ricks, and thanks for making your way to Colorado Springs through some horrific conditions last couple days. My question goes to one that you alluded to briefly about 3 questions ago, and it seems now that U.S. and international forces are out of Afghanistan. Could you give us your thoughts on the depth and breadth of support the Taliban actually have across Afghanistan?
When I went into Afghanistan in January of 2003, I was in Kandahar, so that's where I went because that's where my work was. There was no mention of this entity called Taliban. Nobody talked about it. 2006 and really beginning of 2007, there were these, we call them the insurgent attacks. Attack here, attack there. Slowly, it came from the villages attacking the military forces to the city, where I remember the year that my father got killed, which was July 2011. In 2011, I was living in Kandahar. There was one day, where 6 suicide bombs, and Kandahar is a small city, it's not a big city, 6 major big suicide attacks occurred. And this became the norm of our life. At least in the city, you didn't have these so-called Taliban coming to your home to, force you to give them space or food or whatnot. But in the villages, they did. Taliban had guns and weapons and ammunitions. Afghan government security forces, along with the NATO security forces, had guns, weapons, and ammunition. And so the people were caught in the middle of, what do I do? If I help one group, I become the enemy to the other group, and vice versa. So my assessment or my analysis of the support that the Taliban get, the people of Afghanistan don't support Taliban per se, but they were forced to by the nature of how things were operating on the ground, particularly in rural areas. And then I want to add something extra to that, which is also a challenge, and this is a responsibility that I put on my own Afghan American community of interpreters that accompanied the NATO US forces. Misinterpretations. I hope one day somebody can come out with a nice report on the misinterpretations that led to wrong decisions by our military, because we did not have the right interpreters in the right spaces and places. And so put yourself in the shoe of an ordinary Afghan family. And this is a true story that I'm going to tell you. Again, in Khas Uruzgan, which is a district of Uruzgan province. There's a teacher, he's always been a teacher all his life since becoming an adult. He's on his night prayer, the prayer right after sunset. And the military, whoever the NATO military, I think it was the Dutch at that time, they barge into his home and he's standing on his prayer mat praying. And he tells the interpreter, please just wait, I have to finish my 2 rakat. Rakat in Pashto or Farsi is the help me out, anybody speaks Pashto Farsi here? Rakat is like,
It's the last part of the prayer. Altogether, if you're
let's say each rakat is something like 2 minutes.
yeah, that's what.
but it's the process.
Very
So
good.
every time you bow down is considered 1 rakat. So the last prayer is 2 rakats and he was finishing. So he tells the interpreter, I'm completing my 2 rakats, allow me to finish. The interpreter translates, he's hiding or he's looking for his rockets, ammunitions. Rakats become rockets.
Prayer.
The guy on his prayer mat gets a black bag on his head and taken to be questioned. And after 4 or 5 days of questioning, they finally realized that that was a misinterpretation. Do you know that teacher who was never a Talib, never wanted to be a Talib, after that incident, he came to our house because we knew him through that program we did. He said, from now on, I will support the Taliban. This is one tiny story of how people turn their alliance or allegiance to. Who's to blame? Everybody's to blame. Afghan government is to blame. The Afghan government made mistakes too. Let's not forget that. The very warlords that we aligned ourselves with used their personal animosity against certain families, certain tribes, certain communities, certain leaders to stamp them as, oh, those guys are Talibs. Let's go bomb them. And the military did. So from a human experience, when you act in such negligent ways, my assessment is that I think we turned many more people to like and support the Taliban without intrinsically and psychologically wanting to support the Taliban. And on top of all of that, the nepotism, the corruption, the tribalism that existed within the government of Afghanistan, and I'm a member of that, so I'm probably at fault too. We did not serve our people and our country the way we needed to serve for 20 years or 21 years, which turned our population against us. So I'm not surprised why people turned their allegiance from the government to the Talibs. And now when I go back, and I have gone back, those same people are complaining, are unhappy, and that proves again that they never liked the Taliban from the first place. It's because it was an alternative to them to the corrupt government and to what was happening internationally in their homes and in their communities that turned their allegiance to them temporarily.
And with that, I think we need to say goodnight and thank you. Help me to thank Rangina.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Colorado Springs, for having me, hosting me. I hope we can have future opportunities too.
I would love that, and it has been our pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Keep Afghanistan in your mind, please.
So please join us for our next program, April 2nd, entitled A Conversation with Tom Shanker, and we'll have Tom Shanker with us. Age of Danger, Keeping America Safe in an Era of New Superpowers, New Weapons, and New Threats. This is the title of his recent book. We will have a book signing as well and book sales. If you are wanting to, I know one of the book clubs I think is reading this book right now. Tom Shanker is the director of the Project for Media and National Security at George Washington University, an appointment he accepted in 2021 after nearly a quarter-century career with the New York Times as the Pentagon correspondent, and registration is now open. So for registration for this and other events, please check our website, and thank you all for being here tonight. Good night.